Chapter 11 Reasons for Sending Troops. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At this time, Guion also walked into the office. Seeing Darren and Jiaji sitting there talking like good buddies, she frowned and said nothing in the end. Captain Darren. Guion saluted Darren with a military salute. Darren smiled, waved his hand and said, "You're welcome, Major Guion." He glanced at Guion and Kaki seemingly casually. It can be seen that after yesterday's discussion, they looked at me with a lot of conviction. In this sea, strength speaks for itself after all. "So I wonder what your schedule is today?" Darren gently exhaled a dragon-like smoke and asked with a smile. Guion and Kaki looked at each other, and the former said seriously, "Colonel Darren, after observation, we found that there are certain problems with the income and expenditure of your branch." "Oh." A look of interest flashed through Darren's deep eyes. "Major Guion, what do you mean?" Guion took out an intelligence document well prepared and put it on his desk. His face gradually turned cold. "Colonel Darren, based on the materials provided by the department and my observations, we will not care about the situation of other naval branches in the North Sea for the time being, but only for the Navy of the 321st branch. Their income levels far exceed the military expenditure standards stipulated by the department." Darren flicked the ash from his cigarette and said with a smile, "Isn't this a good thing? As a navy that shoulders justice, we may die gloriously at any time because of our mission to defeat pirates. Apart from the so-called justice, the navy is inherently a highly dangerous profession. Without enough military pay and subsidies, who would be willing to fight for justice with just a little money a month?" Guion bit his teeth. "Colonel Darren, you know that's not what I meant. What I mean is that the branch's military expenses come from the allocation from the headquarters, which means that the military expenses of each branch's navy can be determined. But under your command, the naval military salary standards of each branch in the 4 seas have far exceeded the amount allocated by the headquarters limit. Even more than 5 times or higher than the navy of the same level in this department. So, Colonel Darren, what I want to ask is, where does this extra military expenditure come from?" As soon as these words came out, before Darren could say anything, Jiaji's expression changed slightly. Looking at the high-end cigars on the table, he suddenly realized something, turned his head, and stared at Darren. Facing the questioning looks from Guion and Cake, Darren just shrugged easily and said, "Don't you already know the answer to this question, Colonel Guion?" Guion gritted his teeth and said word by word, "You accepted a bribe." "Bribe?" Darren seemed to have heard some funny joke and shrugged with a smile. No, how can we call the Navy matter a bribe? This is called reasonable charging." Guion looked at Darren, who looked calm in front of him in disbelief, and couldn't help but said angrily, "So the rumors are true. You really have inextricable ties with the mafia in Beihai, and you even took money from them. Do you know that those are the hard-earned money of civilians? It is because of the rampant and oppression of the mafia that countless families have been destroyed. The family is ruined." Darren couldn't help but laugh. "I believe you have also read my work report. Under my jurisdiction, the crime rate in the entire Beihai has dropped significantly, and the living standards of civilians have also improved a lot. Major Guion, you are right. The mafia's money does come from civilians. So, I did receive money from civilians. But if I take money from civilians, I will do things. You know, in a place like Beihai, what civilians fear is not that the Navy will collect money, but that the Navy will not collect money." When Guion heard Darren's words, he was so angry that his whole body trembled. What civilians are afraid of is that the Navy won't charge money. What a fallacy. Protecting civilians is the Navy's responsibility. If you accept money, the nature changes. Darren, get out of here. Where is your belief in justice? Darren smiled. You have your beliefs and I have my way of doing things. I only talk about results, and the result is that I have managed the North Sea very well, better than at any time in history. The situation in the North Sea is far more complicated than you think, and many things are not what you saw in Mtlnovel. Of course. He spread his hands. If you don't accept what I say, you can impeach me. As long as the department issues an order, I am willing to accept any punishment from the department. Guillaume opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but at this time Flying Squirrel walked in with a hurried look. Colonel Darren. The Flying Squirrel's face was extremely solemn, as if he felt the tension in the office, and he hesitated to speak. Darren glanced at him, waved his hand and said directly. Tell me, what happened? The Flying Squirrel nodded and said solemnly. The operation of Germa 66 to kill the Four Kingdoms has begun. The evil army has assembled more than 10,000 troops and is about to launch an attack on the Kingdom of Yadis. Based on the strength and combat power of both sides, once the Kingdom of Germa launches a war, the Kingdom of Yadis is estimated to not be captured within an hour. The Tyrell governor of the Kingdom of Yadis has sent a request for help from our North Sea Navy, hoping that our North Sea Navy will send troops to mediate. After the words fell, the expressions of Cake and Guillaume suddenly changed. Germa 66, a powerful force known as the Evil Army and War House, is a unique non-territorial country in the world and a member of the franchising countries recognized by the world government. At the top of the power pyramid in the Germa Kingdom is the Vinsmoke family, as officers of the headquarters. The two of them naturally know something about Beihai, a powerful military country. The king of the Germa Kingdom is the contemporary head of the Vinsmoke family, Vinsmoke Gaji, nicknamed Strange Bird. He is a scientist who masters profound military science and technology, and the Germa 66 led by him is one of the most powerful troops in the world and has a great reputation in the North Sea. If Vinsmoke Gaji really wants to dominate the North Sea as he threatens, it is estimated that the entire North Sea will be dragged into the war. Thinking of this, both of them trembled inwardly, and their eyes became a little panicked. They grew up in Marineland, the Navy headquarters. After all, they were too young now and had never seen war with their own eyes, so they were a little panicked for a while. Subconsciously, he looked at Darren. So, didn't that strange bird receive the letter we sent? Darren half squinted his eyes and said with a half smile. When Flying Squirrel saw Darren's expression, the familiar relationship he had worked with for many years made him instantly realize that Vinsmoke Gaji was going to be in trouble. It has definitely been delivered to him. He said solemnly. Very good. Darren laughed and put out his cigar, his eyes gradually becoming cold. Then let's go. The Flying Squirrel nodded, took out a military phone bug, called his subordinates at all levels, and acted quickly. Darren casually put on a large cloak of justice. Etc. Guillaume's voice came from behind, and his tone was uneasy. Darren glanced back at her. Guillaume hesitated for a moment, gritted his teeth and said. Should we report to the headquarters first? Our navy does not have the power to interfere in disputes between countries. Rashly interfering in the internal affairs of other countries, if not careful, will trigger political disputes. What an innocent girl, a thought flashed through Darren's mind. With the strength of Germa 66, if we wait for the headquarters reply, it is estimated that the heads of the kings of the 4 North Sea countries will already be hanging on the wall of Vinsmoke Gaji. He sneered. Furthermore, I will not allow Germa 66 to start a large-scale war within my jurisdiction, resulting in the casualties of innocent civilians. Guillaume was stunned when he heard this, and his eyes lit up. It seems like this guy still has some sense of responsibility. The next words of Cologne almost made her spit out a mouthful of blood. Otherwise, if all the civilians die, who will I ask to collect the money? Guillaume's chest rose and fell rapidly. Staring at the tall man in front of him, he shouted angrily. Darren, you bastard! Are you protecting civilians just to collect money? At this time, the sound of military bugles gradually sounded from the distant military port. That was the navy of the 321st branch being assembled. Darren smiled. Of course not. Guillaume was startled, and felt inexplicably relieved. Darren smiled and said. Besides this reason, Mrs. Marjorie is in the Kingdom of Yadis. We just slept together the night before yesterday. If we don't take action, there is no way we can justify it. Guillaume, addition, they were stunned. I dare you to send troops just to save your mistress. Chapter 12. I'm here to end this war. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Kingdom of Yadis, border waters. The sky was gloomy, the wind was roaring on the sea, and huge waves were rolling. On the border, tens of thousands of soldiers from the kingdom of Yadis held swords and spears in a loose battle formation. Their eyes were horrified and their faces were pale as they looked at the huge ships that kept appearing on the sea in the distance. The hands holding the weapons trembled uncontrollably, a ship, 2 ships, 3 ships, 1 after another. The warships, which were like military fortresses, marched smoothly on the stormy sea, sailing towards the kingdom of Yadis with an iron-blooded momentum. The flag with the word 66 branded on it is hung over every battleship. The main structure of the battleship is made of rock and metal, and is dragged forward by giant snails. The leading main battleship is even more gigantic, the size of a small town, and the high-spirited cross-falcon flag hangs on the towering spire of the main castle, the Saint-Germain. This is the main battleship of the army of evil Germa 66. Damn it! Is the navy here yet? King Yadis III is a fat middle-aged man with a golden crown on his head and a mustache. He wears luxurious clothes, and the fat on his body squeezes out the wrinkles of the aristocratic clothes. At this moment, he looked at the Germa 66 army coming like a torrent of steel on the sea in the distance, like a black cloud looming over the border, and he was so anxious that cold sweat broke out all over his face. The lunatic Mtlnovel actually threatened to cut off his own head and ask the kingdom of Yadis to hand over him as the king. Otherwise, he would lead the army of evil and destroy the entire kingdom of Yadis. Raised to the ground, seeing the vague looks that the surrounding army soldiers sometimes cast towards him, Yadis III was as anxious as an ant on a hot pot. Your Majesty the King, I have informed Mr. Darren that the 321 branch has sent troops and will arrive at any time. Tyrell, the Governor-General of the Kingdom of Yadis, replied respectfully. He is a handsome-looking man, who looks to be in his early 30s, with a touch of femininity between his eyebrows, and a faint fragrance emanating from his luxurious dress. After hearing the words of his administrative governor, the anxious Yadis III felt a little relieved, but his face was still full of anxiety. The Kingdom of Germa has been established in the North Sea for 300 years. It has a fearsomely powerful army and extremely advocates force. Most of the people in the country are adult men, and all citizens are brave soldiers. In the face of such overwhelming military strength, although our own army has a numerical advantage, if it really starts to fight, it is estimated that it will completely collapse in less than 10 minutes. Aboard the Saint-Germain, a tall, burly blonde figure stood at the bow of the ship like an iron tower. He wears a metal helmet, has long golden hair like a lion's mane, and has a serious expression. He has a pointed black beard that is angled upward, and a small beard on his protruding chin, wearing an orange cape, a light gray combat uniform with Germa's 66 logo, black combat boots, and holding a silver-white metal spear in his hand. Mtlnovel, the head of the Mtlnovel family, the commander of Germa 66, and the current king of the Germa kingdom. What a bunch of losers. Such a weak country can exist in Beihai for so long. It is simply a shame to Beihai. Mtlnovel stared at the army on the distant coastline with cold eyes, and a sneer curled up at the corner of his mouth. Master, are we sure we want to take action? The new admiral of Beihai in the navy. A man wearing a butler's tuxedo stood respectfully behind Mtlnovel and asked cautiously. Mtlnovel raised his eyebrows. The butler man's pupils shrank. Laugh. Blood spurted out, and a sharp spear pierced his heart. Red blood gushes out, and the light in the butler's pupils quickly fades. He looked at his master with disbelief on his face and knelt on the ground weakly. Admiral Beihai. He is just a colonel from the Navy headquarters. What qualifications does he have to send me a letter to warn me? Mtlnovel looked at his subordinates with cold eyes. No one can stop Germa's glory and dominance. After saying that, he whipped out his spear and shook it, splattering a line of blood on the ground. He never took another look at his subordinates who were slowly falling and losing their vitality behind him. Germa, there is no need for cowardly soldiers. As for the letter sent by the so-called Beihai admiral named Darren, he had already thrown it directly into the trash can. Such a thought flashed through Mtlnovel's mind and he looked around. Densely packed figures stood on the warships of Germa 66 one after another, muscular and tall. Every soldier wears sunglasses and has a dull and indifferent expression. Even though they were about to face a war, the expressions on the faces of these soldiers showed no emotion at all. clone soldiers, Mtlnovel looked at his group of loyal subordinates and smiled with satisfaction. The cooperation with Vegapunk allowed him to obtain part of the blood factor technology, by transforming the baby's bloodline factors. He mastered cloning technology and used it to create clone soldiers for Germa 66. The clone soldiers have a strong physique and absolutely obey orders. Their bloodline has the concept of not afraid of death and never betrayal. In the opinion of Mtlnovel, this is the best and most powerful army in the world. A mere navy is simply vulnerable to a war army like ours, which is not afraid of pain or death. The most important point is that with the current technology we have, it only takes 5 years to create a 20-year-old soldier. In other words, as long as you have enough funds, you can copy soldiers unlimitedly and create the largest army in the world. As long as he conquers the 4 North Sea countries including Yachties, and then seizes the entire North Sea, with the help of the resources of the entire North Sea, the number of his armies will be endless, and he will even be able to dominate the world. Thinking of this, Mtlnovel sneered and raised his hand and made a gesture. Following his movements, the originally scattered battleship camp quickly made adjustments. Driven by giant snails, dozens of warships quickly approached each other in an orderly manner, in the frightened and shocked eyes of tens of thousands of soldiers in the kingdom of Yachties. The dozens of warships that were originally scattered in Germa 66 were actually combined into a huge monster floating on the sea. Towering military fortress, huge black barrel. There are also tens of thousands of densely packed clone soldiers armed with swords and guns. Looking from afar, the entire Germa 66 fleet has turned into a giant war beast armed to the teeth, exuding a fierce and terrifying aura. This is the kingdom of Germa. For the glory of Germa. Dominate the North Sea. Mtlnovel raised the spear in his hand with a ferocious smile and shouted loudly. The words fell. Tens of thousands of clone soldiers raised their weapons in neat movements, and the sound shook the world. For the glory of Germa. Dominate the North Sea. The deafening roar seemed to turn into substantial sound waves, spreading towards the army of the kingdom of Yachties on the coast. The overwhelming killing intent almost suffocated them, and many young soldiers even fell to the ground, and the weapons in their hands fell with a clang. Yachties III himself was so scared that he was shaking all over and had to rely on the support of several ministers next to him to barely stand still. It's over, he murmured with a pale face. Aboard the Saint-Germain, seeing how miserable the army of Yachties' kingdom was, Mtlnovel laughed wildly. Kneel down and surrender. Germa is the overlord of Beihai. He raised the metal spear in his hand high, and flickering blue light emitted from the spear. Following his movements, the entire stern and iron-blooded military fortress of the Germa kingdom actually moved towards the coastline at full speed. The huge scale and volume set off turbulent waves several meters high on the sea. Mtlnovel took a deep breath and said with a ferocious smile. All preparations, attack. Before he could finish his words, a dark cannonball suddenly fell from the sky and landed heavily next to him. Mtlnovel's pupils shrank. Boom. A violent explosion suddenly rose, and billowing fire and dark smoke spread out. The sudden change caused the army of clone soldiers, who were originally preparing to charge, to stagnate. On the coastline, the nobles and troops of the kingdom of Yachties were also stunned on the spot, looking at this scene with blank faces. Damn it! Who is it? The strong wind blew away the thick smoke, and in the firelight, the grey-faced figure of Mtlnovel crawled out of a deep pit, roaring with gnashed teeth. As if he noticed something, he turned his head and looked in a certain direction. At the same time, the ministers and soldiers of the Yachties' kingdom also looked at that location. I saw the howling wind and rolling waves on the sea. A huge warship slowly emerged, on the towering mast. The word justice dances in black. A tall, imposing young figure stood on the bow of the warship, with a wide white cloak behind him fluttering in the strong wind, making a hunting sound. It's Darren. The navy is coming. We are saved. Yachties III suddenly burst into tears of joy, his face flushed with excitement. In contrast, Mtlnovel's face was extremely pale. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people from Yachties' kingdom and Germa kingdom, the warship sailed into the sea where the two sides were confronting each other at a steady and fast speed. Like an impassable natural chasm, the armies of the two countries are separated from each other, in an instant, the atmosphere on the sea became dead and tense. Everyone involuntarily moved their eyes to the figure on the bow of the warship. He has short black hair, sword-shaped eyebrows and starry eyes. And his facial features are deep and cold. A smile gradually appeared on the corner of the Navy captain's mouth. Raise your head. His eyes are unruly, looking at Mtlnovel in the distance. His expression was extremely ugly. In the name of justice. His voice echoed in the empty sea. I'm here to end this war. Chapter 13 Magnetic Fruit Famous Scenes. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I'm here to end this war. The Navy captain's deep voice gradually echoed on the Dead Sea, making everyone's eyes widen. On the deck of the warship, the Navy officers of Beihai looked at the domineering Lord Admiral on the bow. Their eyes shone with admiration, and the eyes of many young female Navy officers turned into red hearts. Damn it! He pretended to do it again. Why can't I think of such a line? Jiaji glanced around at the other people's reactions, then cursed in a low voice. His face flushed. Gion's eyes flashed slightly. At this time, the furious voice of Mtlnovel came from the kingdom of Germa. Darren, what are you doing? Do you want to attack me? Germa is a member of the world government's affiliated countries, and it is a powerful country that is qualified to attend the World Conference. To attack me, you are provoking the affiliated countries. And your navy has no power to interfere in disputes between countries. Darren narrowed his eyes. The cloak of justice behind him fluttered wildly in the wind, and sneered. Mtlnovel. It is true that the Kingdom of Germa is a member of the government, but the Kingdom of Yadis is also a member of the member states. The most important thing is that I will not tolerate such a serious war under my jurisdiction. Mtlnovel laughed angrily and said. So you think you, a mere naval colonel, with a few hundred men on a warship, can stop my Germa 66 army? Naive Navy brat, stop talking nonsense here. He raised his hand heavily. No one can stop me, Germa, from my ambition to dominate the North Sea. A flash of madness and violence flashed in his eyes. Fire! Let me sink that warship directly. With Germa's status as a member of the world government, even if this so-called bullshit Beihai admiral were killed on the spot, he would not receive the slightest censure from the world government. And this can also send a signal and a warning to the Navy headquarters. Even their navy must not hinder Germa's path to hegemony. Tremble under Germa's fire. Surrender. The words fell, boom boom boom. The deafening sound of gunfire shattered the dead silence on the sea. Everyone in the kingdom of Yadis was horrified to see. On board Germa's battleship, countless fires bloomed and vomited crazily, along with streaks of fiery red light leaping into the sky. They felt that the changing sky suddenly seemed to become gray, as if covered with a thick layer of clouds. No. That's not a cloud. There were almost countless artillery shells and bullets, densely packed and cutting the air like locusts, making sharp explosions, drawing dense parabolas in the high air, and covering the area where the warship was located. The dark expanse formed a terrifying and oppressive death net. There is nowhere to escape. In an instant, scorching squally winds blew in from above, and hundreds of shells were fired. At this moment it was like a heavy rain, and even the sea was filled with a strong smell of gunpowder. It is even vaguely visible that the shape of the cannonball is not a regular ball, but similar to a rocket launcher and a missile. This is the powerful military technology of Germa 66 that is enough to dominate the North Sea. On the warship, Cake and Gion's expressions changed greatly. Damn it! Germa 66 actually dares to attack the Navy. Mtlnovel is crazy. Jiaji was so anxious that a thin layer of sweat broke out on his forehead. Gion suddenly pulled out the famous sword from his waist, but his expression was extremely serious. A dense shelling of this scale was enough to easily flatten a small mountain range in an instant, and it was impossible for them to intercept it. The most important thing is that they are in the middle of the sea now. Once the warship under their feet is sunk, even if they survive this terrible bombardment, they will not be able to resist the second round of bombardment after falling into the sea. However, just when the two of them were anxious, they were suddenly shocked to find that the faces of the other sailors on the warship had extremely strange expressions. Could it be? Gion and Kaki suddenly reacted, and both turned to look at Darren on the bow of the warship. At this time, the top military commander of the Beihai Navy, moved. A sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. He looked up at the rain of shells falling in the sky, and slowly raised his hand. A gentle push in the void. It felt like a gentle push of the air. Then, suddenly there was a weak purple arc flashing through the void. The invisible force field spread silently. Cake and Guillaume were stunned. Their eyes gradually widened, as if they had seen some incredible scene. On the coastline, tens of thousands of soldiers from the kingdom of Yachties, including the king, were even more stunned, their eyes almost jumping out of their eyeballs. I saw the dense network of fire pouring down from the sky like locusts, countless cannonballs and bullets. That it was as if I suddenly hit an invisible film. The speed of falling suddenly decreased sharply. Finally, it froze in mid-air. Strangely, densely packed cannonballs silently suspended in mid-air 5 meters above the warship, motionless. At such a close distance, even Kaki and Guillaume could clearly see the lines on the shells and smell the pungent smell of gunpowder. Quiet. The world suddenly fell into deathly silence. The arrival of the ultimate deathly silence even gave everyone an illusion. In the world in front of me, all the air seemed to be buzzing and vibrating. On Germa's main battleship, Mtlnovel looked at this strange scene with splitting eyes. He couldn't believe his eyes. The whizzing and falling cannonball actually stopped in mid-air. The whole world seemed to stop at this moment, in an atmosphere of silence that makes your heart beat faster. Suddenly a slight voice came out. Click. Light the lighter. On the bow of the warship, the black-haired naval colonel was blocking the cold sea breeze with one hand and holding a lighter in the other, lighting a cigar. A bright or dark red light lights up. One last chance for you, Mtlnovel. His tone was very calm. Following his words, countless cannonballs suspended in mid-air slowly rotated under the pull of some invisible force, as if the cannon was adjusting its angle. The rocket launchers that were spitting out flames also changed their directions. The target is aimed far away in the direction of the kingdom of Germa. Mtlnovel's expression changed drastically. Looking at the countless rocket launchers and missiles that had turned in a dense manner, a biting chill immediately ran down his spine. Admiral Beihai took a deep drag on his cigar, and the smoke condensed into a snow-white flag in the air. Go back, I can pretend nothing happened. Chapter 14. One person destroys a country. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What kind of ability is this? Jiaji stared blankly at the slowly turning cannonballs above his head, and even his words became stuttering. The ability to manipulate metal. Guillaume also looked stunned. The flying squirrel next to him crossed his arms, smiled and lit a cigarette. That guy Darren's ability to control magnetic fields is becoming more and more precise, and far away. On the Saint-Germain, Mtlnovel watched this oppressive scene with trembling eyes, and he couldn't help gritting his teeth at first. However, what Darren said directly ignited the anger in his heart again. This Navy brat has such a big tone. Does he really think that with the power of a devil fruit, he can fight against the army of evil in the kingdom of Germa? Stop joking. If I can't even deal with a brat like you, how can Germa 66 dominate the North Sea? Mtlnovel roared with red eyes. All attacks. Get close to me. Crash the warship. As soon as the words fell, the Germa fleet group rioted again. Under the drag of the giant snail, it turned on its power and accelerated crazily towards the warship where Darren was. Darren said nothing. He slowly raised his hand again. His movements were so slow, and even more awkward compared to the charge of dozens of warships from Germa 66 roaring forward on the sea, setting off turbulent waves. Even tens of thousands of people in the kingdom of Yachties on the coast can clearly see his movements. The long and powerful 5 fingers stretched gently in mid-air. Then, make a fist. The next second, buzz buzz, a violent, sharp sonic boom suddenly sounded. Everyone's eyes widened. I saw the dense group of artillery shells in mid-air that seemed to block out the sky, and the sun suddenly trembled violently. There seemed to be an invisible storm emerging from the void. Then the air exploded with roaring sounds. The sky is filled with a rain of cannonballs suspended in the air. A death net that can easily level half a mountain. Unexpectedly, following this action of the Navy Admiral, he shot fiercely towards the battleship group of Germa 66 at a speed twice as fast as when he fell just now. Mtlnovel's pupils instantly became bloodshot. Boom. A torrential downpour of shells crazily crashed into the war fortress built by dozens of warships, earth-shaking huge explosions sprouted flowers all over the land of Germa Kingdom one after another, and fiery red mushroom clouds bloomed continuously. Under such a violent bombing, the army of clone soldiers had no time to react. They could only watch as their cutting-edge technological weapons exploded beside them, and were then mercilessly swallowed up and submerged by flames and shock waves. Fierce flames soared into the sky, and the island-like kingdom of Germa shivered under the ground-washing bombardment. The vast explosion stirred up horizontal air waves, which circled out towards the sea in all directions, setting off waves of turbulent waves. Thick black smoke billowed into the sky, and the distant vibrations and waves made the soldiers of the Yadi's kingdom on the coastline turn pale. On the warship that was swaying due to the storm, everyone in the navy, including Guillaume and Cake, clung to the mast and other fixed objects to prevent themselves from being thrown away. The two people in Guillaume couldn't help but look at the figure on the bow of the ship that stood still in the storm like a rock. Against the backdrop of the explosions and flames in the distant Germa kingdom, Admiral Beihai smoked a cigar. His usual calm smile still hanging on his lips, the broad snow-white cloak behind him looked as dazzling as blood under the firelight. In a trance. They finally realized, the reason why Darren is able to manage this extremely chaotic sea area of the North Sea so obediently and orderly is not only due to his strong and sophisticated political skills, but also his strong and sophisticated political skills. The most important thing is his monster-like strength. Powerful enough to easily destroy an entire country by one person. The continuous explosions lasted for a full minute before slowly ending. When the cold sea breeze blew away the thick smoke, everyone saw clearly the tragic situation of the Germa kingdom, which was composed of dozens of warships, and they all gasped. The ground was scorched, with embers of fire burning everywhere and pits deep or shallow. The towering and fortified forts and fortresses have collapsed and turned into blackened ruins. The ruins were strewn with the bodies of clone soldiers, many of which had been blown to pieces, leaving only vague stumps and broken arms. On the main battleship Saint-Germain, the cross-falcon flag hanging at the highest point gradually turned into ashes in the flames. Most of the Germa kingdom was directly razed to the ground. Cough, cough, cough. At this time, a violent coughing sound suddenly sounded from somewhere in the ruins. Damn Navy brat, how dare you! As the blackened rock walls and rocks shook off, the figure of Vinsmoke Gaji stood up from the ruins with difficulty. At this time, he was no longer as arrogant as he was at the beginning. His body was covered in blood and he looked extremely miserable. The cloak with the 66 logo branded on his back spread out from his body like a living thing. It seems that you have developed the first generation of combat uniforms. Darren raised his eyebrows and murmured with interest. The battle suit of Germa 66 is a high-tech product made by Vinsmoke Gaji. This powerful battle suit is made of specially crafted shape memory armor that is extremely strong. His cloak serves as a shield and even fire cannot burn it. It was the defensive effect of the cloak that helped him block the impact of the explosion. In that case, let me try the power of this battle suit. Darren murmured softly, his eyes flashing. He turned his head and said something to the Navy. You guys are holding on tight. Guillaume and Cake were stunned, but before they could react, they saw the other sailors, including Flying Squirrel, hugging the railings on the hull tightly. Without having time to think, they followed suit and hugged the fixed objects on the warship. Then, Darren took a deep breath, hiss. As he took this breath, a large portion of the cigar he was biting burned visibly to the naked eye. The naval captain stared at the Saint-Germain 100 meters away with stern eyes, knees slightly bent, the body sinks, the cloak behind him flutters, the muscles in the body are tense and compressed like springs, the posture is like a cheetah ready to go. Hey, hey, hey. Isn't it possible? Jiaji seemed to have guessed something, and the corners of his eyes twitched, as if to confirm his thoughts. Darren's whole body was tense and his body was sinking, and the corners of his mouth were raised. The body that was compressed to the extreme like a spring suddenly exerted force. Boom! A dull loud noise came from the hull of the warship. Cake and Guillaume felt as if the world in front of them suddenly became upside down. Terrifying centrifugal force surged out, and their bodies were almost thrown up. The entire huge warship was tilted due to Darren's kick. The bow of the ship sank forward into the sea, the tail of the warship was raised high, and the tilt angle of the deck reached almost 45 degrees. Boom! Darren's feet exploded with unparalleled force, and the huge tilted warship moved sideways for several meters. With the help of this recoil force, Darren's figure shot out from the bow of the ship like a sharp arrow from the string, and broke through the sound barrier in an instant, blasting the air with a sharp explosion. His figure roared parallel to the sea, so fast, the air waves it carried even plowed out a long white wave groove on the sea surface. Chapter 15 Germa's Technology. You are listening at novelfull.audio. What a freak! Seeing the figure that shot out like a sharp white arrow towards the Saint-Germain, Guillaume, who firmly grasped the railing of the warship with both hands, looked like he had seen a ghost. Boom! At this time, the high-pitched tail of the warship fell into the sea again under the action of gravity, and the waves rushed down, drenching the navy on the warship. Jia didn't care about this at all, staring at Darren's figure in shock, his eyes almost popping out of his sockets in shock. This exaggerated explosive power. That bastard actually wanted to use his own power to directly cross a distance of nearly 100 meters and enter the Germa kingdom. Hey! Does that bastard always like to be so crazy? Jia looked at the flying squirrel not far away with a twitching corner of his mouth, and couldn't help but ask. A helpless smile appeared on the flying squirrel's face. This is how Darren fights. In the past year alone, more than 5 warships have been scrapped by him in various ways. If it weren't for the strong financial resources of the North Sea Navy, the North Sea Fleet would have gone bankrupt long ago just relying on the little military expenditure allocated by the headquarters. The flying squirrel couldn't help but complain in his heart, it's too late, it's too late. The warship here once again regained stability on the sea, and Darren over there had already smashed into the land of the kingdom of Germa like a horizontally fired cannonball with overwhelming momentum. Boom! A deafening roar sounded, a large amount of dust flew up, and the entire ground seemed to shake slightly. The next second, with a cigar in his mouth, Darren slowly stood up from a 5-meter diameter pit, with an unruly smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. Smooth landing. He smiled and said, the cloak behind him dancing wildly in the vast dust and strong wind. Kill. Kill him for me. When Mtlnovel saw such a cruel naval admiral, his pupils shrank, and then he gave the order with a ferocious expression. The words fell, countless clone soldiers rushed out from the ruins of surrounding forts and fortresses. The clone soldiers, wearing uniforms and sunglasses, moved uniformly and exuded a cold aura, as if there were no human emotions. Aha! They all raised their spears, and hundreds of their guns were pointed at the naval colonel. Pull the trigger. Bang 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 bang. Large swaths of fire were swallowing in the muzzle of the gun, and countless bullets roared out from the muzzle, leaving traces in the void. Haven't you learned your lesson yet? Darren grinned, a look of madness flashing in his eyes. Without the ability to use the magnetic fruit, he just walked forward leisurely in the face of the dense rain of bullets. Mtlnovel's eyes suddenly widened, as if he had seen some incredible scene. Ding 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 ding. Densely packed bullets landed on Darren's body one after another, shattering and exploding his suits and military uniforms one after another, but they made a crisp sound as if they had hit steel. Sparks flew up, and bullets ricocheted off the naval colonel's body like raindrops hitting the ground, leaving fine craters on the surrounding ground, fortresses, and building walls. From a distance, the naval captain looks like a traveler facing a violent storm. So tough. How is this possible? How can humans have such a physique? Mtlnovel roared with splitting eyes, seeing that the gunfire was ineffective. A clone soldier took out a small rocket launcher from the military fortress, put it on his shoulder, took aim, and pulled the trigger. Bayou. The palm-sized small rocket launcher made a sharp blast, dragging a long red tail flame and roaring towards Darren, but the latter suddenly raised his hand and grabbed him. Brand new technology. This is much more sophisticated than the Navy's artillery shells. Darren looked at the trembling rocket launcher in his hand with interest, said something casually, and then threw it heavily. Bayou. The rocket launcher returned the same way and exploded in front of the clone soldier holding the rocket launcher barrel. The raging flames instantly engulfed an area within 5 meters in diameter. It's as powerful as a small heavy artillery, but more portable. Darren squinted his eyes to observe the power of the rocket launcher and gave an intuitive evaluation. He probably already had an idea in his mind. he worked so hard to harvest wealth from the mafia and support the North Sea Navy with military expenditures that were several times higher than his own. Of course, his goals were extremely clear. He wants to turn the North Sea Navy into his own private territory. The entire North Sea Fleet will become his personal armed force. As a time traveler, he is well aware of the biggest constraints of being a navy, that is, no matter how you try to whitewash it, the justice of the navy always overrides the power of the world government. This is a real issue and cannot be ignored. The Navy, the largest violent law enforcement agency in the world, is an agency under the world government and is also the face of the government, and the most critical point in this is military spending. The world government collects heavenly gold from members of the world's major alliance countries, and then directly or indirectly controls the financial lifeline of the Navy through military expenditure allocation. The Navy, which does not have independent financial power and lacks additional channels for obtaining military expenditures, can only be restricted everywhere, and finally has to bow its head in reality. The ultimate goal of Darren's money-making is to control an independent military force that can be used by himself and is not subject to government constraints, at least for now. After the hard work and planning of the past few years, the Beihai Navy's military expenditures have completely met the self-sufficiency, and even the military expenditure standards far exceed the level of the headquarters, but this is not enough. Darren is deeply aware that the Four Seas Navy is weak, and its combat power is far inferior to the elite of the headquarters. Compared with the level of manpower dominance in the New World, it is still extremely far away, although through various means of strengthening training and scientifically executing training methods, the overall strength of the Beihai Navy has been greatly improved, but this is still far from enough. But back to reality, improving the combat effectiveness of the army cannot be achieved overnight, and it cannot be achieved in a day. But the Germa 66 in front of him opened up a whole new way of thinking for him. Germa 66 controls one of the most advanced and cutting-edge military technologies in the world. Whether it is various new weapons, human transformation technology or even combat uniforms, it can quickly increase the combat effectiveness of the North Sea Navy. If you can obtain the technology of Germa 66, you can use it to equip your own North Sea Navy. Darren believes that he will have an extremely powerful North Sea fleet in a short time. In this case, the corners of Darren's mouth cracked in an arc, and his figure suddenly quickened his pace. The target, the commander of Germa 66, Mtlnovel. Data is very important during the new book period. I ask for all your support and reading. I am grateful. Chapter 16. I am a genius in my own department, so I can add some tricks. You are listening at naval.audio. As Darren began to charge, striding forward, the ground where he landed shook violently, and a hole exploded. It was as if he had been hit by an invisible giant hammer and sank directly, causing mud to fly. Under the explosion of this inhuman power, Darren's whole body was like a roaring cannonball, wrapped in a violent hurricane, and rushed out in the blink of an eye. In an instant, Mtlnovel felt a suffocating pressure on his face, and a biting chill ran down his spine, as if he was being targeted by a giant Neptune-like beast. The murderous intent emanating from the Navy captain was like a demon, slain from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. It was as if the sea breeze blowing was filled with the smell of iron and blood. Kill him for me. Thinking of the cruel methods used by the Navy to suppress pirates in his mind, Mtlnovel's eyes were filled with bloodshot eyes and he screamed sharply. As soon as the words fell, dozens of clone soldiers around him picked up their weapons and rushed towards Darren. Two bright long knives slashed down towards each other, the corners of Darren's mouth raised, and his figure turned slightly. The sharp blade just grazed his body. The moment when I missed you, the Navy colonel's hands were like spears made of steel, turning his palms into knives and piercing the throats of the two clone soldiers at an extremely fast speed. Laugh. Red blood shot out, and the clone soldier's pupils quickly became dim. Without any pause, after easily dealing with the two people in front of him, Darren's figure rushed out again like an escaped tiger, with a physical defense comparable to that of an iron block. He ran into the camp of clone soldiers, as if a tiger had entered a flock of sheep, overwhelming. Looking from afar, the dense army of clone soldiers surrounded the naval colonel, and the sounds of flesh and blood being torn apart and bones being broken kept coming from the center of the encirclement. the warm corpses of the clone soldiers kept flying out of the crowd and falling down with blood splattering. In just 10 seconds, the ground was stained red with blood, and body parts were everywhere. Guion and Cake on the warship watched this scene from a distance with their hearts shaken. Their expressions horrified. At this moment, Darren seemed to have turned into an efficient and precise killing machine. Wherever he passed, none of those clone soldiers, whose physiques were several times stronger than those of ordinary people, could stand for a moment under his abnormal physique in fierce close combat, and would be killed if touched, destroying everything. Every part of Darren's body has become a murderous weapon, as if a strong wind sweeps away leaves, harvesting lives at an alarming speed. Bullets, steel knives, battle axes, long swords, all kinds of weapons fell on his body, but they seemed to be struck on steel. Sparks flew out, leaving only a faint red mark. The Navy captain, covered in blood, laughed wildly, and the white cloak of justice behind him was stained with blood red. "That guy is enjoying the fight." Guion stared blankly at the naval captain with a wild smile on his face, and his mind couldn't help but recall the scene on the school field yesterday. Faced with his iron-cutting swordsmanship, Darren chose to resist. Now it seems that he is not conceited about his physical defense at all, but simply enjoying the feeling of life and death hanging on a thread and fighting with abandon. This is really a lunatic. Guion gritted his teeth and couldn't help but curse inwardly. Cake next to him glanced at Guion and saw her looking at Darren's back. Stunned, suddenly he seemed to realize something, turned his head and shouted hurriedly towards the flying squirrel. "Hurry! We want to go too. I'm going to beat the hell out of Mtlnovel." The flying squirrel was stunned, a little confused as to why Jia Ji, a lazy pig, suddenly became so active, and subconsciously said, "Are you sure? Colonel Darren doesn't like us interfering in his battles. He is enjoying it now, and according to our intelligence, the commander of Germa 66, Mtlnovel, is very powerful. The high-tech weapons he developed." Before he could finish speaking, Jia Ji grabbed the collar of his military uniform. The latter's face turned red and he said viciously, "Damn flying squirrel! Who do you think I am? I'm the genius of this department, so I can add some tricks. How can a mere Germa 66 be my opponent?" He let go of his hand, turned around suddenly, rolled his little eyes, glanced at Guion from the corner of his eyes, looked in the direction of Germa 66 with awe, and chuckled in a low voice. "This feeling of blood boiling, I haven't seen it for a long time. I didn't expect that someone in Beihai could bring such pressure to this genius." Looking at Jiaji's chic figure, the corner of Flying Squirrel's mouth twitched. He waved his hand helplessly in a military gesture. The Navy immediately took action. The warship's engine was fully powered, and it accelerated towards the warship group of the Kingdom of Germa, and the other side, Kang. A crisp sound sounded, like gold and iron clashing. Several steel knives hit Darren's chest hard, sparks flew up, and he broke with a snap. The clone soldiers in front of them looked at the steel knife with their hand broken into 2 pieces, and a flash of astonishment flashed in their eyes. Although they were deprived of the sense of pain by Mtlnovel and were not afraid of death or betrayal, their basic emotions still existed. But they couldn't understand at all why the body of the man in front of them was harder than the weapons they hammered out of fine steel. And it is obvious that compared to the beginning, this Navy's physical defense has become stronger. That's almost it. As expected, actual combat is the best way to improve your strength. Darren suddenly laughed. In his insight talent perception, after the round of fighting just now, his physical fitness and strength have improved a lot, especially physical fitness, which has exceeded the 60-point mark. It's time to get down to business. After his physical fitness reached 60 points, when faced with attacks from clone soldiers, there was no obvious improvement effect. Moreover, these guys have been deprived of the emotion of fear and are tireless and fearless of death. It is just a waste of time to continue fighting with them. Thinking this, Darren licked his chapped lips. A sharp whistling sound sounded from behind. Several clone soldiers jumped up high and slashed at Darren's neck with steel knives, but the next second, they were shocked to find that the long knife they swung suddenly stopped when it was just a slap away from the back of Darren's head. Buzz buzz, an extremely oppressive silence enveloped the surroundings. The long knife hovering in mid air kept vibrating and buzzing. then, no one saw the marine captain make any move, the ground under your feet suddenly moved. Strips of steel bars rose up from the ground like giant black pythons, intertwined and intertwined like living creatures, turning into a dense black net that enveloped the clone soldiers. They didn't even have time to react. Their bodies were completely restrained by the twisted and twisted steel bars, and then they were torn off alive. The steel bars imprisoned their bodies, with both ends inserted deeply into the dilapidated ground, tightening them tighter and tighter. In the horrified and almost frozen gaze of Mtlnovel, Darren's location is the center, and there are hundreds of clone soldiers within a radius of 100 meters. They have all been restrained by steel bars that grow from the earth and are constantly tightening. Blood gushes out, and the rusty steel bars cut open their skin and flesh. In just a few seconds, scarlet blood flowed all over the ground. Their bodies were penetrated and strangled by entangled and twisted steel bars, and various internal organs flowed all over the ground. The entire battlefield suddenly fell silent. The top officer of the Beihai Navy stood among the ruins of blood-red corpses. Countless steel bars around the body danced like long black snakes, like a devil coming out of hell. Chapter 17 I am the King of the North Sea. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Dust billows, the cold steel danced wildly. Mtlnovel looked at the Germa kingdom that was mostly in ruins. His eyes were splitting. Damn it! I am the man who wants to lead Germa to dominate the North Sea. Darren narrowed his eyes and smiled. The Navy is the overlord of this sea. As for the title of King of the North Sea, I will not give it to you. He raised his hand and waved forward. Dozens of twisted steel bars suddenly rioted, stretched and elongated suddenly, pierced the air under the influence of the magnetic field, and roared towards Mtlnovel. Laugh. Two streams of white smoke suddenly shot out from the heel of Mtlnovel's boots. Driven by the propeller, the figure soared from the place like a strange bird. Then let you see with your own eyes the true power of Germa 66. Darren Brat. He waved the metal spear with both hands, constantly knocking away all the steel bars that were rapidly penetrating. He swooped down from the high altitude, his long golden hair flying behind him. Sizzle, shining blue electric light bloomed on the spear, blooming with a dazzling light. Electromagnetic thrust. In the blink of an eye, Mtlnovel had swooped in front of Darren, grasped the electric spear with both hands, and stabbed it down brazenly. The high-temperature current and penetrating power even caused the air to explode with explosive sounds. The power of technology. Facing the electric spear that could penetrate steel and fortresses, Darren just chuckled. The strong wind blowing in his face disturbed the tips of his black hair. He saw the tip of the spear getting closer and closer to his eyebrows, and he could even feel the hot electric temperature, but he still kept smiling. An invisible magnetic field fluctuation suddenly spread out from his body. The next second, there seemed to be ripples in the air. The exploding spear seemed to have pierced into a mass of transparent paste, and the penetration speed slowed down at an alarming rate, and finally stagnated. Mtlnovel's pupils shrank. No matter how hard he drove the spear, the invincible high-tech weapon in his hand remained motionless, as if it was tightly grasped by a big hand. Using the power of technology against me is your greatest stupidity. Darren said calmly. Damn! I don't believe it. Mtlnovel roared hysterically, and simply gave up the spear in his hand, spinning his body in mid-air, his boots bursting with dazzling lightning, and volleying hard towards Darren's head laterally. Electromagnetic crushing attack. However, the same scene happened again. The combat boots that continuously sprayed out white-eyed air waves were also frozen and imprisoned in mid-air by that strange force, and could no longer move. Mtlnovel's expression flashed with horror. My high-tech weapons were completely restrained by this guy's devil fruit ability. Before he could react, Mtlnovel felt his eyes blurred, and the naval colonel in front of him had disappeared. What a speed! The bursting wind blew by his side. Mtlnovel gritted his teeth, and a chill ran down his spine. Behind him, the fluttering cloak suddenly began to squirm like a living creature, wrapping his body around him. Boom! A military boot hit his abdomen with great force. With the majestic power erupting, the commander of Germa 66 flew out like a cannonball and shot towards a military fortress in the distance. Rumble! The entire castle was penetrated instantly. Dense cracks spread across the walls, and then collapsed. Countless rocks fell, and the earth let out an overwhelmed wail. Darren landed firmly. Damn it! This is impossible. My technology is obviously invincible. Seeing the figure of Mtlnovel stumbling out of the ruins, Darren's lips curved into a satisfied smile. He is testing the power of this battle suit. Mtlnovel was different from his future children. His body had not been genetically modified by technology, and he did not have an invulnerable monster body. Most of his strength comes from his high-tech weapon, the battle suit. Without his combat uniform, he would not be more powerful than a naval officer. Although this is only the first-generation battle suit, and its power is far inferior to that shown in the Cake Island plot, it is objective enough. Now it seems that, at least judging from Mtnovel's attack and the defense level of the cloak just now, Darren is very satisfied with the power of this first-generation battle suit, at least within the scope of his estimation. Any professionally trained navy equipped with similar combat uniforms would probably have a combat power that was not inferior to that of a Commodore, and at this moment. Ha 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 ha. Let me help you, Darren. The genius from the Navy headquarters will defeat the evil army commander in this battle, save the war-torn Yachty's kingdom, and become the leader of the Navy. Hero. A burst of wild laughter came from not far away. Darren was stunned and looked back. I saw that my own warship had docked at some point, and Guion and Flying Squirrel were leading the Navy in a fierce battle with the remnants of the clone soldiers, and Jiaji's figure rushed out of the crowd with great momentum, kicking up billowing dust along the way, and rushed towards Mtlnovel with overwhelming force. Several black lines floated up Darren's forehead. This guy wants to be in the limelight again. He subconsciously wanted to speak, but Jiaji laughed proudly and said, Darren, don't take action. Darren thought for a moment and stopped. Jiaji was ecstatic when he saw this, looking at the panting Mtlnovel. He couldn't help but raise a proud smile on his lips. He had already seen from the previous fight that this guy was not very strong. As long as he lays him down, Guion will definitely look at him differently. Even if it doesn't work, I can become the hero who saves the kingdom of Yachty's. How many ladies will be waiting for me to care for them? Thinking like this, the pace of the charge is getting faster and faster. The evil army commander Mtlnovel, I, lieutenant commander of the Navy headquarters, in the name of justice. He didn't finish his sentence. Boom. A combat boot wrapped with blue electric light stepped on his face without any bias. Then, it flew back at twice the speed of its original charge and crashed into a military fortress, not far away. The Flying Squirrel covered his face with his hands in pain. Mtlnovel was defeated so completely. It was not because he was weak at all, but because Darren was too strong. Guion shook his head speechlessly, kicking away this idiot Navy who appeared out of nowhere. Mtlnovel panted and turned back, staring at Darren. Damn it. One after another, you Marines are such an eyesore. Boom. The combat boots under his feet spurted out hot air again, and the figure once again soared towards Darren. He was never willing to admit that the technology he had worked so hard to study from Vegapunk had been defeated so completely. However, facing his offensive, Darren just raised his hand and shook it gently. The invisible magnetic field spreads and acts. The figure of Mtlnovel paused in midair. The next moment, severe pain came from his hands and feet. Laugh. The sound of flesh being punctured came out, the metal spear in his hand, and the boots on his feet. The loaded metal components squirmed and stabbed out like living creatures, piercing his hands and feet and dripping with blood. Ah! The severe pain made him cry out uncontrollably, but soon several thick steel bars sprang out from the ground, entangled like a python, and tightly imprisoned in the air. Kang! A piece of metal sealed his mouth, silencing his wails. Thick bloodshot eyes densely filled the area around his pupils. Shoo! The naval colonel walked up to him, made a silent gesture, and smiled elegantly. I'm sorry, your plan to dominate the North Sea is over. Chapter 18. Shall I leave? You are listening at novelfull.audio. That evening, Kingdom of Yachty's, capital Vilna, gorgeous palace side hall. Darren, you bastard. That's Germa. A country that joins the world government, and you almost destroyed it. Furious roars came from the military phone bug placed on the coffee table. The phone bug vividly simulated the furious and smoky appearance of Admiral Sengoku of the Navy headquarters. Did you know that the Kingdom of Germa is not an ordinary member of the member states? It is one of the member states that is qualified to participate in the World Conference. Do you know how much political pressure this will cause? Protecting members of the participating countries is the Navy's duty and responsibility. Darren sat on the soft leather sofa, holding a glass of whiskey on the rocks and a lit cigar in one hand. He crossed his legs and smoked a cigarette, listening casually to Sengua's curses. Gion, Flying Squirrel, and Kage, whose face was as swollen as a pig's head, stood there without daring to take a breath, looking at their eyes, nose, and heart. Damn it! Darren, you bastard, did you even hear what I said? After squirting for 2 minutes, Sengua became even more furious when he saw that Darren had no intention of answering. You, Admiral of Beihai, don't want to do this. Darren smiled and said. Then shall I leave? Warring States. On the other side of the phone bug is the General's office. Warring States suddenly lost his temper and his old face turned red. The situation in Beihai is extremely chaotic, and he has not forgotten the lessons learned by the two bastards Porcelino and Sakaski when they served in Beihai. Only Darren, a cunning little devil, can manage Beihai obediently. If he leaves office and without his suppression, I am afraid that the North Sea will soon become the back garden of pirates and mafia. Families. Kidding. Darren's smile became more intense. He picked up the whiskey and took a sip, feeling the spicy and rich liquor flowing through his throat, and said lightly. General Warring States, don't be so nervous, I will take care of this matter. Hearing Admiral Beihai's calm attitude, Warring States almost jumped up again, and the corners of his eyes couldn't stop twitching. He took a deep breath and suppressed the urge to rush to Beihai and beat up Darren immediately. Boy Darren, what on earth are you thinking? If this matter is not handled properly, it will cause a series of reactions. Warring States' voice was low and solemn as he said. The Kingdom of Germa has been a member of the world government for 300 years since its establishment. The Navy takes action against members of the participating countries. If this matter gets too big, even I won't be able to protect you. Darren exhaled a puff of smoke and smiled. Of course I understand, Warring States General. But this time the incident happened for a reason. Vinsmoke Gaji led Germa 66 to attack the Kingdom of Yachties. The Kingdom of Yachties is also one of the government's participating countries. If I hadn't stopped this war, I'm afraid that now the Kingdom of Yachties has fallen into war and bloodshed. The corners of Zhangguo's mouth twitched. Are you trying to stop this war? You almost massacred the entire Germa Kingdom army. Darren continued. As for the chaotic situation in Beihai, I believe that with the wisdom of the Warring States generals, he will have a clear understanding of it. Wars and frictions between countries continue. This incident just sends a signal and a warning to many countries in the North Sea. As for the casualties in the Kingdom of Germa, the army of Germa 66 is basically made up of clone soldiers. The products of this cloning technology are essentially weapons and are naturally not civilians. Based on the ambition and unruliness of Vinsmoke Gaji, after careful consideration, I think that only in this way can we teach him an impressive lesson. If we don't use crushing force to subdue him, with his character, he will only become more and more arrogant, rampant, and unscrupulous. By then, the Kingdom of Yachties may not be the only one who will be dragged into the quagmire of war. It is unimaginable that by that time, how many innocent civilians will have been deprived of their lives by war, and how many happy families will be torn apart because of Germa's ambition. Hearing the Marine captain's awe-inspiring words, Guillaume and Kaki, who were standing next to them, both rolled their eyes. You don't care about civilian casualties, you only worry that the outbreak of war will cause you to have no money. Warring States on the other side of the phone was also silent at this time. He naturally knew something about Vinsmoke Gaji, the ambitious German commander. Indeed, as Darren said, the Kingdom of Yachties is only the first step for Vinsmoke Gaji. After all, the latter's ambition and goal is to dominate the entire North Sea. So Darren, what are you going to do about it? Warring States pondered for a moment, and the anger in his voice dissipated a lot. Although I am very dissatisfied with Darren's action, now that it has happened, it is useless to hold him accountable. Darren's talents, methods, and achievements, all prove that he is an indispensable mainstay of the Navy's future, and according to Singh's understanding of Darren, this cunning and shrewd kid never gets into trouble, no matter how sensitive a political issue is, he can perfectly resolve it in an unexpected way. You don't need to worry too much about this, General of the Warring States period. Darren flicked the ashes from his cigarette and smiled with interest. I'll take care of everything and make Vinsmoke gauge an offer he can't refuse. He will not protest to the world government. The Kingdom of Germa will still remain a member of the alliance. The Navy will not be implicated or affected in any way. Peace and stability will still be maintained in the North Sea. Darren leaned forward slightly with a stern smile. Under the governance of our Navy. The side hall suddenly became quiet, with only Darren's strong and domineering voice echoing faintly, 3 seconds later. Then leave it to you, Darren. No matter what, this matter must be dealt with. Sengoku's deep voice came from the phone bug. Darren smiled with satisfaction. Promise to complete the mission, Warring States General. Blue. Telephone bug communication is interrupted. Darren turned to look at the flying squirrel. How's the situation going with Germa's side? The flying squirrel said solemnly. 10 warships and more than 5,000 troops have been mobilized from other branches in the North Sea. Basically, the situation in the entire Kingdom of Germa has been controlled. Their fleet has sailed away from the Kingdom of Yachties under our escort sea area. As for Vinsmoke Gaji himself, he has been imprisoned on our warship according to your wishes. Darren nodded. After many years of cooperation and collaboration, he has considerable trust in Flying Squirrel's ability to do things. What are you going to do with Vinsmoke Gaji? No matter what, he is the leader of a country. Guion, who had remained silent until now, finally couldn't help but speak. Darren glanced at her and suddenly smiled. Major Guion doesn't need to worry too much. We have more important things now. What's the matter? Guion was stunned. Darren clapped his hands and said with a smile. Celebrate our victory. Chapter 19. The Navy doesn't charge money, and the people are dissatisfied. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. As Darren clapped his hands, the door to the ornately decorated side hall was suddenly pushed open. Soldiers from the Kingdom of Yachties wearing standard military uniforms carried in large wooden boxes one after another. In less than a minute, dozens of large wooden boxes were piled on the marble floor of the side hall, looking like a hill. Darren, could this be? Guion looked at the large wooden box, which was obviously heavy, and a bad feeling suddenly came over him. At this time, a man dressed as a butler walked in, with a flattering smile on his face, nodded and bowed. Admiral Darren, I am the Minister of Finance of the Kingdom of Yachties. He pointed to the large wooden box on the ground. This is a small gift from our Kingdom of Yachties. Please do not refuse the North Sea Navy Fleet, which is responsible for justice. As he spoke, he asked his soldiers to open the wooden box. In an instant, Guion and Kaki's eyes widened and their mouths opened into an O shape. Dazzling and bright light emanated from the large wooden boxes that were opened one by one, illuminating the entire side hall of the palace with colorful lights. Wow! A dazzling array of gold and silver treasures, large piles of colorful banknotes, all kinds of rare treasures, fine cigars, high-end wine, tilted out of the fully loaded wooden box. Like flowing mercury, making the entire side hall smelled of money and corruption. This. Jiaji stared at the piles of gold and silver treasures in front of him with his jaw dropped. He stuttered when he spoke, and the expression on his swollen pig head was extremely funny. What wealth is this? He couldn't even count them. Having grown up in Marineland, he had never seen such huge wealth in his life. Darren smiled with satisfaction. Your Majesty, King Yachties is too polite. It is our Navy's unshirkable duty to protect members of the participating countries from harm. The finance minister laughed and said. Of course. Who in the entire Beihai doesn't know that our admiral is selfless, honest, and dedicated to protecting the lives and property of our people in Beihai without asking for anything in return? Beihai can be protected by Lord Darren, which is really a blessing for the entire Beihai. It's just that we can't let many officers of the North Sea Navy come here in vain. Hospitality is the tradition of our Yachty's kingdom. Please don't refuse, Lord Darren. He's quite good at talking. He's truly worthy of being the Minister of Finance. Darren smiled and was about to nod. Unexpectedly, Guillaume suddenly took a step forward. His pretty face was full of anger, and he gritted his teeth and said, "No. We can't accept this money." She turned around and glared at Darren fiercely, and said angrily, "Our Navy will never accept money from other sources. Darren, this is a bribe. If you dare to accept this money, I will report you directly to the headquarters." Jiaji next to him also shouted, "Yes. I will report you to the headquarters." It was as if his expression was too excited and caused injuries on his face. He grimaced in pain and his teeth itched with hatred. If it weren't for Darren, a bastard, he wouldn't be instantly killed by Vinsmoke Gaji and make a fool of himself in front of Guillaume. After hearing the words of the two men, the smile on the finance minister's face froze. He looked at Darren carefully and asked respectfully, "Lord Darren, these two are?" Darren smoked a cigar and smiled relaxedly. "Oh, these two are Major Guillaume and Major Cake from Marine Headquarters. Well, they are my adjutants now." "Directly from the Navy Headquarters?" The finance minister immediately noticed the clues in Darren's tone. He was able to reach a high position in charge of a country's finances in the Kingdom of Yachties, so he was naturally an extremely shrewd veteran, so he immediately turned around with a smile, bent towards Guillaume and Kaki and said, "It turns out that he is a naval lord who has come all the way from the headquarters. I am really blind and a little rude. I am very sorry," Guillaume said to the Minister of Finance with a solemn expression. "Hello sir, I must clarify a fact here. Our Navy is responsible for defending peace and justice. Protecting civilians is our responsibility and obligation and does not require any reward." She pointed to the glittering gold and silver treasures all over the place, and her tone was decisive. "We cannot collect this money, otherwise it would be the greatest insult to justice." "Of course. Major Guillaume is right. The Chancellor of the Exchequer deeply agrees. But you two came all the way and worked tirelessly. The Kingdom of Yachties also prepared an extra small gift for you. Major Guillaume looks like a powerful swordsman at first glance. It just so happens that there is a piece of fine iron in our kingdom's treasure house that can be used to forge a fine scabbard for your favorite sword. As for Major Jiachi, we also happen to have a lot of good cigars here. Guillaume, addition, Omega, I told you, we can't accept anything." Guillaume said angrily. The finance minister was stunned for a moment, then smiled and said, "Of course, in addition to the above gifts, we will also compensate you two for their hard work in this battle. There are also many fine swords in the royal family's treasury, which Major Guillaume can choose from. As for Major Jiaji, our royal family's song and dance troupe has prepared a wonderful performance for you. Addition, carrot oh carrot." "Really?" His eyes lit up and he blurted out, "Boom!" Before he could finish his words, he was kicked out by Guillaume. His head was buried in the wall, and his feet were dangling in the air. Your Excellency, I seriously refuse. I don't mean to ask you to add more money." Guillaume's face turned pale with anger. He took a deep breath, gritted his silver teeth and said, the finance minister was suddenly stunned and looked troubled. "If you keep putting it off, aren't you just asking for more money? Isn't it enough?" At this time, Darren couldn't stand it any longer. He sighed helplessly and spoke to save himself. "Excuse me, Mr. Minister. We like these gifts very much. Please tell King Yachties that our North Sea Navy is deeply grateful for this." The finance minister breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Actually, this is because the people are too enthusiastic and spontaneously raise funds to thank the Beihai Navy for its efforts. In addition, the royal family has prepared a banquet for you tonight. Please attend." After saying this, he bowed slightly to Darren and others, and then left quickly. When the door closed, Guillaume finally couldn't restrain his inner anger and said angrily to Darren, who sat down again and crossed his legs, Darren, but before she could finish her words, Darren interrupted her with a wave of his hand. Guillaume, you have also seen that the finance minister is in a dilemma. If you don't accept the money, he will have no way to go back and deliver the work. This is the rule of Beihai. In their view, if you don't accept the money, they won't be able to feel at ease at all. Justice doesn't work in this sea area. To a certain extent, this is similar to giving red envelopes to doctors during surgery on Earth. If the doctor doesn't accept the red envelope, the family members will be worried. This has nothing to do with career, this is human nature. Seeing that Guillaume still wanted to refute, Darren shook his head. Okay, that's it. You all go get ready. You have to attend the dinner party later. Chapter 20 The Extra Plan of Caring for the People. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Damn Darren. You betrayed your belief in justice. You are a disgrace to the Navy. Scum of justice. Guillaume's angry curses came from behind, but Darren walked out of the palace side hall with a smile. He doesn't care what others think of him. Caring too much about reputation will only constrain your actions and prevent you from letting go. This is a world of the weak and the strong, following the most primitive laws of the jungle. Darren does not deny that there are indeed some people in the Navy who insist on their inner justice from the bottom of their hearts, and he also sincerely respects these people. They are willing to sacrifice everything for the ideals and beliefs in their hearts to protect those things they want to protect, sacrificing their youth, energy, and even their lives. Such people are indeed respectable and great. This is why Darren doesn't dislike Guillaume, who is in the way, because there must always be idiots like Guillaume to make this world full of hope, but Darren thought he couldn't do this. Because the right path is too difficult, Darren does not have a monster level talent like Sakaski, nor does he have a wealthy family background like Guillaume. From the beginning of his journey 5 years ago, he has walked step by step until now, especially in a chaotic sea like the North Sea. Every step he took was extremely difficult and thrilling, like walking on a tightrope on a cliff, so he must be cautious and cautious, careful and careful, seize power, wealth, strength, interests and status as much as possible. Now, it's time to reap the fruits of victory in this war, Darren thought in his mind and quickened his pace. Night falls. Vilna, the capital of the kingdom of Yadis, is brightly lit and bustling with activity. Royal Palace, Guest Hall, the nobles, celebrities, ministers, crown princes and wealthy businessmen of the Yadis kingdom attended the event in their best attires and drank wine. The crystal lamp on the ceiling casts bright light, reflecting charming ripples on the red wine in the hands of the guests. The guests chatted happily. Let me tell you, that battle was truly thrilling. The Germa 66 are truly an evil army. Their commander, Mtlnovel, is as powerful as a monster. On one side of the banquet hall, Jia, who was wearing a brand new tuxedo and looked like a dog, shook the red wine glass in his hand and boasted extremely loudly to a group of aristocratic ladies and ladies in attendance. You all don't know, but the weapons he uses are extremely sophisticated high-tech weapons. The electric current released from the spear can directly stun an elephant. Hearing this, the ladies and ladies of the noble family covered their mouths with their hands and let out shocking low sounds. Then what? Then? Jiaji deliberately lowered his voice, making his voice full of magnetism, imitating Darren's appearance in his mind, and smiled faintly. The power of Germa's technology is indeed very strong, but I am a genius who has been tempered in the Navy headquarters. I am just a Mtlnovel. How can I be my opponent? I just kicked the guy and kicked him away more than 10 meters. Facing the majesty of justice, he still wanted to struggle to death. In the end, I thought he was too noisy, so I blocked his mouth. The ladies and ladies all opened their eyes wide and looked at Jiaji with bright eyes. The admiration in their eyes made the latter secretly happy. That's awesome, Major Jiaji. He is truly a genius from the Navy headquarters. A powerful evil army like Germa 66 was easily defeated by you. Facing the adulation from everyone, Jiaji felt as if the pores all over his body were relaxing. Beihai is better, there are so many gorgeous aristocratic ladies and ladies, the best red wine, fine cigars, and wonderful performances by the song and dance troupe. No wonder that bastard Darren stays here. As for the truth of what I just said, Well, anyway, when the war broke out, the kingdom of Germa was some distance away from the coastline. Coupled with the fog on the sea, even the army of the kingdom of Yachties couldn't see clearly what was going on, let alone those who were there. The ladies and ladies of the capital Vilna, after thinking about the details, Gyagi took a sip of red wine, smoked a cigar with a desolate expression, and sighed sadly. Do you know? I have been looking for a decent opponent my whole life. I thought that coming to Beihai would bring some fun to my talent. I didn't expect that I would be so disappointed in the end. The ladies and ladies were even more shocked when they heard this. They stared at Gyagi with bright eyes and sighed one after another. Even Major Gyagi is so powerful, so how powerful will Lord Darren be? Yes, Lord Darren is not only powerful, but also so handsome and charming. Yes, yes. Thinking of the appearance of the top officer of the North Sea Navy, the ladies' faces showed a shy blush, and the noble ladies' eyes were obsessed with them, as if they were in love with spring, edition. No, didn't you hear what I said? Isn't this talking about my genius? Why are you getting involved with that bastard Darren again? That guy didn't even attend the party. Gyagi couldn't help roaring in his heart, the muscles on his face twitched, and his face gradually turned dark. He took a long drag on his cigar, his face full of anger. That, Mr. Gyagi. At this moment, a timid voice suddenly sounded from behind. He subconsciously turned around and saw a girl in a white lace dress standing there with a slightly blushing face, her small white hands in front of her body constantly stirring, exuding a shy youthful temperament. Such a beautiful and pure girl. Gyagi felt as if his heart had been hit by something. His heartbeat slowed down by half a beat, and a pair of red hearts shot out from his eyes. Love. This is love. His heart screamed wildly. Mr. Gyagi, I think. The girl raised her eyes shyly, glanced at Gyagi timidly, and then quickly withdrew her eyes in fear, as innocently as a frightened deer, and said. I need, phone bug, contact information. She is shy. She wants my phone bug contact information. She must have heard about my accomplishments. She likes me. As if struck by lightning, Gyagi nodded vigorously in panic. No problem, I'll give you my personal phone number right now. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but raise. No. I want to ask if you know Mr. Darren's contact information. The girl shook her head with a blush on her face. Click. Gyagi felt as if his heart had been hit by something. His heartbeat stopped, and the red hearts in his eyes suddenly turned to stone and cracked. In the girl's stunned eyes, he turned around like a deflated balloon, turned to stone, and walked toward the corner of the banquet hall with his back bleakly, and then squatted there, motionless. 2 lines of tears flowed down his face unsatisfactorily. Not far away, Guillaume, who was wearing a pink evening dress with a high slit, refused the invitation to dance for the 15th time. He glanced at Cake, who was squatting in the corner and puffed out the black smoke of depression, and the corners of his mouth twitched. She took a sip of red wine, as if remembering something. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists, and on the other side, Darren also came to the port and boarded the warship.